Hello everyone, my name is Omar and I'm a product marketing manager here with SolarWinds MSP, and joining me today is Chris Reed.
Hello everyone.
Today we're going to be taking a look at what's new within Central 11.1. In terms of today's webinar, just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. So the length of the webinar is going to be around 30 minutes. We're going to be taking questions at the end. Feel free to throw them in as we're going along today's webinar. We'll try to work in your answers as we move along. If not, we'll answer every question that we can at the end of the webinar. There will be a recording, so for sure we'll be putting out a recording and all the slides will be posted as well. So just a quick introduction to SolarWinds MSP. In terms of how many MSPs we're currently supporting, it's 20,000 plus, and those MSPs are supporting more than 5 million managed devices across 160,000 small businesses. Growth is on our mind. We're adding on about 200 new partners a month, so definitely our commitment is to you guys. In terms of, if you've just tuned in for a while, where we've been for the past couple of years. So in 2015, we added in a couple new features, especially with our 2 new major releases. That's adding in features such as reactive management, automation patch, complete UI rewrite as well. So that's version 10. 10.1. We also had a bunch new of acquisitions. So MSP Manager, the PSA application, MSP Anywhere, the remote control application, and then throughout that year since 2015, we've started integrating it into N-Central. And as you can see in 10.2 and version 11, we now have MSP Connect remote control. We also have patch management, which constantly gets improved, and again, we'll see that in today's webinar, what we've added in more for patch management, and then also role-based user permissions. About a year ago, we purchased one of our competitors, LogicNow, and ever since that acquisition, we've added in a lot more products to our portfolio, mainly the SolarWinds Risk Intelligence, the vulnerability and assessment scanning, and then also the SolarWinds Backup, which again has been getting high praise from both our customers and just even our partner reps here in terms of how flexible of a backup solution it is. Definitely urge you all to take a look at that solution. With all these acquisitions and new products, we're definitely number one in the space now. We can confidently say that we're probably the biggest RMM. We are the biggest RMM vendor that's out there. So quick introduction to N-Central 11.1. It being a remote monitoring and management platform, it's all in that mindset of single pane of glass. So we have patch management, antivirus, backup, mobile device management, remote control. It's all part of that single pane of glass. However, what we try to do is take the control away from the end user, as in the interaction with the end user. Right? So we've added in a lot more behind the scenes capability, whether it being behind the scenes remote control, that would be the direct support. Being able to do anything that you would without having to get in the end user space. This way you can do 2 or 3 things all at the same time. And then you got to prove it to the customer what you're doing, right? So we have customer-facing reporting. This is using our report manager. So again, you can deliver on that value you promised. We also have the scripting with our drag and drop automation manager. So anyone, regardless of the scripting ability, can write a script using that tool. Integration with the top PSA products. So we have our own, as we alluded to, with MSP Manager, and then we also have integration with ConnectWise and AutoTask as well. Very impressive integration. Definitely one of the best out there. Also, we have stress-free scalability. It's a very customizable, very scalable product. So no matter what, as you grow, the product will follow behind. And then last, we also have the add-on tools with both Risk Intelligence and also a mail product. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at what's new with MSP N-Central 11.1. And there's definitely a lot of new features. However, we're going to be focusing on just 3 key ones for today's webinar. So any questions that you have would definitely be best to be related to these 3 features. So the first one is delayed automatic patch approvals. And we also have the new hover over icons. And then lastly, we have the monitoring agent for Ubuntu. Starting off with patch management. Now, at a high level, what patch management is able to deliver for you is a complete hands-off approach to managing your Windows and third-party updates for your servers and workstations. Now, this can be configured in any way, shape, or form you can think of. Right? There's not a single scenario that you could possibly conceive of the scheduling, the patches, how they're installed, which vendor, what device, you name it, you think it up, we can adhere to it. And I can say this with confidence, but it really doesn't matter anything to you guys unless it's easy to set up. All right? And with that, we've added in a lot of resources in terms of documentation, and plus we also have the patch setup wizard, which will create these maintenance windows for you. Right? That's how patch works for us, is it's all based on these 4 different maintenance windows for detection, download, install, and reboot. We also have integrated pro patch caching. All right, so you can cache your patches once, not having to install them, not having to download them over and over again. You can set up profiles on any number of devices, whether it's one or many. And lastly, the beautiful thing about it is that it is automated, right? Meaning that it not only applies to your devices today, but it'll apply to the devices tomorrow, right? So you don't have to set up the same settings over and over again. And that's just half the battle with patch management. It's just the scheduling and you know who gets which setting. The other half of the battle is the approval, right? The whitelist and blacklist on your patches, whether it's Windows or third party. And this can be done many ways, whether it's manually per device, whether it's by patch. There's also the automatic approval, which is what most people end up using, which takes your third party and your Microsoft patches, and you can automatically approve them. So that would mean that anything that comes from Microsoft that's detected would automatically get whitelisted to be installed across your devices. And you know, for sure this exists today. However, what we've added in this new feature, all right, so what we've added into this new release of N-central 11.1 is delayed automatic approvals. So it's essentially this one little tab here, which now allows you to delay your approvals by up to from 1 to 365 days. So for example, today, if you were to set up patch management, a typical configuration would be to detect patches on Tuesday and then install them on Thursday. In today's patch management scenario, no matter what, any patches that were detected on that Tuesday would get installed on that same week on that Thursday. With the delayed approval, simple enough, you would set a 30-day delay period. So whatever is detected on that Tuesday would get installed 30 days after. This was designed for 2 key reasons. Right? Number one, it could be if you have a test group of devices. So think of it like you have, you know, a lab set up, something that you use to just play around with across your devices. And you want to make sure to test the patches first so that in the event that you actually install a bad patch, you can find that out first before you deploy it to your customers' devices. So what you'd be able to do then is set up, let's say, one automatic approval to target those test devices first, and then set up another automatic approval with a 30-day delay period, so that this way you have a completely automated approach to testing patches, and all you have to do within those 30 days is check to see if that test device is okay or not. If you asked me to do this today in N-central before this feature, it would be a pretty long-winded process. You'd have to go and find the test devices, find the patch, approve it, wait to install it, and then check it again. We can eliminate all of that with an automatic approval. If you don't even have a test group of devices, you could look at this another way. Because don't forget that Microsoft themselves will probably pull a patch if they see it wreaking havoc across the ecosystem. So 30 days is definitely more than enough if Microsoft was to release a quarterly roll-up that caused a whole bunch of machines to blue screen. Considering that we use Windows' own update agent, you can be sure that if Microsoft pulls a patch, we're not going to be installing it as well. Key thing to note is that on existing automatic approvals, this is turned off by default. The tab is there. You don't have to go recreate it. It's just that the setting is turned off. Right? So this would be a very, very small change to your existing patch approvals. You don't have to go rework all of your rules or anything like that. It's just one button for to your automatic approvals. Moving on, we have the new hover over icons. So really what this concept, really what this feature is behind is, I want you guys to ask yourselves if you've ever had a check engine light in your car that you had no idea what the problem was. You know, you might have to go call a buddy to get the OBD scanner and then plug it in and see what the problem is, or take it to a mechanic and let them do that themselves. But there's some time there to diagnose the issue and figure out if you actually care or not. In terms of N-Central, you can see that we have kind of the same philosophy with the old status icons, where when you hover over a status icon, it just says the service and the status behind it, whether it's failed, warning, disconnected, normal, etc. In terms of what we've added in with N-Central 11.1 is now we have not only the value returned, but also the threshold behind it as well. And this feature was implemented with efficiency in mind, right? Meaning that now you don't have to click around all over the dashboard. You don't need to go open up multiple tabs. You don't need to go, fiddling around in Central just to figure out if you care or not, right? Because again, if I say failure for 8 different things on a server, you got to see if the actual value that's returned is something that you wish to actually go and troubleshoot. This feature was implemented into 3 different dashboards. The all devices view, which is probably the best place for it, because again, if you take a look at that status column again, it's one status column for everything the device monitors, right? Just think about your servers. How many different monitoring services do you have added in to a server? If you have more than one fail, then the column for status switches to failed, right? So you can get much more visibility into why it failed, the value behind it, and the threshold behind it as well. This was also added into the regular dashboard, so that big checkerboard that you can create yourself, and also the active issues view. So think about it again. It's all about efficiency in mind, reducing the number of clicks to figure out what the actual issue is. Last but not least, we have the monitoring agent for Ubuntu. If you think about today what N-Central features for Linux capability, we do have a Red Hat Enterprise Linux agent that's supported on both Red Hat and CentOS. That has to be manually installed, and in terms of the Ubuntu agent, we now have the ability to support the last 2 long-term support builds of Ubuntu. On top of that, we've actually even added in the capability for the probe to automatically deploy that monitoring agent for both the Red Hat agent and the Ubuntu agent. And the way that this has been implemented within the UI is, you can see there, the credentials have been added in to where you would typically add in your Mac OS X credentials. All right, so this is just SSH, where you would type in your SSH authentication credentials. We would try these credentials when we go to push out the agent. Furthermore, we've added in the ability to detect more hardware, OS, networking, and software data, just as you would today with your Windows and Mac devices. This way, your asset reporting is more complete, and you're not left having to kind of guess what's on those Linux devices. So, typical stuff here: processor, hardware, how many sticks of RAM, warranty. It's all been collected now as part of that software data. And then finally, now that we have that agent installed on the Ubuntu servers, we also have agent-based remote control, right, where before, we actually had to use the probe to tunnel in, but that dependency is gone. We do it straight from the agent now. So if you think about this feature, it's all about that idea of if you've ever had to say no to a monitoring opportunity to a customer, right? If they have, Ubuntu servers that some old IT guy left behind, and you've just kind of neglected those devices for a while, you can now have a complete spectrum of monitoring across your devices, no matter what operating system they have. Right? So whether it's Windows, Mac, Linux, either architecture and networking devices, there's nothing that you can't say. Yes, I can monitor that. That's not all. We did add a bunch more features as well. You can take a look at them here. Specifically the bug fixes, which actually Chris Reed will highlight now as well.
Yeah, thanks, Omar. Yeah, guys, it's interesting to talk about bug fixes in the context of, hey, we've got a new release with new features. But I think in this case, it's something worth talking about. The feedback we've heard from you guys very consistently is that the putting in more new features at the expense of making sure that existing features work properly is not something you're comfortable with. The clear feedback we got was around, you need to make sure that your product is stable, is reliable. This is a key piece of your infrastructure, and if it doesn't work or if there's problems with it, that really affects your day-to-day activity and your profitability. And so one of the big pushes we've had this year was around really ramping up how much time we spent on quality. You would have seen that in 11.0. You would have seen a lot of that results in 11.0 Service Pack 1. That fixed about 107 or 108 bugs, and it continues in version 11.1. We've got over 145 bug fixes. The feedback we've got from the beta with people who are running it on their production servers has been that it is more stable than what they were using with 11.0 Service Pack 1. And I want to call that out because it's not fixing bugs is not a very sexy activity necessarily, but it's important. It's important to you guys, and because of that, it's important to us. And so we've really been putting in the hard efforts to get that bug crush done, make this product as really as high quality as possible. I think you guys will appreciate our efforts in that regard.
Awesome, cool. Thank you, Chris. So that's all that we have to show you today, but we're definitely going to keep it open for questions. Now, as you guys have your questions start rolling in, what we're going to do is actually give you a live demonstration of the new features here. So I'll make Chris Reed presenter, and go ahead and start asking questions while he shows you what's new.
Great, thanks, Omar. So what I wanted to show you guys first was to build upon what Omar was discussing around better hoverovers. So let me show you guys what it looks like now in Central 11.0. I'm on a dashboard at the moment, or even I'll start off with maybe the all devices view. And you can see I have a list of devices, and I can see that this particular Windows server is showing a failed state. And right now, if we hover over that failed icon, we helpfully show you the word failed. That's not very helpful, that was kind of tongue-in-cheek. So what we've done in 11.1, looking at the same kind of scenario, but on an 11.1 server, is when I hover over the status icon for, let's say, this Linux server, I now see which services correspond to the state. In the case of my home computer, it's patch. In the case of this particular Dell machine in our lab, it's a system warranty problem. But now at the all devices view level, when you're looking at, hey, what's wrong with this device, you're deciding whether you want to go investigate it further or whether there are more important things to see, we now give you that information right up front. And it's important to note too, this is based off of feedback we got during the beta. Let's say for the sake of discussion that this Dell server had some services in a failed state and some in a warning state. What this will show you when you hover over it is just the services that correspond to that overall status icon, failed in this case. So we're not going to show you all the services that are not in a normal state. We're just going to show you the services that correspond to that failed state in the case of this device, or the warning state in the case of this other device, or in the case of this Linksys, all the normal states, and so on. Now, that's pretty useful. That is the first step towards understanding, what it is that's happening on a device and what you want to do about it. The next piece, though, is really interesting. So in version 11.0 or 11.0 Service Pack 1, the versions you guys are running today, when you're looking at a dashboard, if you hover over the status icon for a given service, like for CPU, all that we show you are the metrics inside the service that have a threshold. And so if we go down to something like patch status, for example, this is what we show you is here are all the metrics that are thresholded and their status. And that's pretty useful. That's a pretty good start. But there are a lot of metrics inside of services that are, sometimes they're string values, they're just text. And so they help you understand maybe what's happening contextually speaking. If I go over to 11.1 and take a look at the same kind of things, what we start to see is that now, what I see for CPU is not just the metric, but also the value and what thresholds there are. So now I can get a really complete picture of what's actually going on. If I take a look at the disk service, in this case, because I have several disks here on my home PC, a C drive, an E drive, and an F drive, I get an overall status for all three. If I hover over this, my work laptop actually, it only happens to have one drive. And so in that case, it shows me all the details about this C drive. It shows me the total disk size, the disk space used, and the overall percentage, as well as the actual values and their thresholds. This gives you guys a much better image as to what it is that's going on. And same thing for patch status. If I hover over patch status, I get a nice long list of all the things that are going on and what's happening. Now, the neat part here is why does this matter to you guys? What's the benefit? Seems kind of neat, but what's the benefit? Well, the answer is this is what you do with the product all day long. A huge part of your day as a MSP using N-central is figuring out, N-central's found an alert. What's the problem, and what do I want to do with it? Previously, if you wanted to understand more about what was happening with patch on this particular device, you'd have to right-click and say open in a new tab, and then you'd wait for it to load, and you'd scroll down, and you'd figure out what's going on. Now, though, with the changes we've made in 11.1, you can hover over and see right away what it is that's going on. So we've saved you having to drill down into the devices or having to drill down into services. There's still some times when you'll want to do that, like if you want to maybe set up self-healing or you want to change a threshold. But we've saved you guys 5 seconds, 10 seconds for every single time you do this. And you do this 10, 20, 40 times a day. This is a small change on our part, but it's going to make a huge difference to your efficiency using N-central. Now, I'll quickly talk a little bit more about Ubuntu. I know that Omar did a great job of showing off some of the features, but I thought I'd show it to you live there just to spark some conversation too. If I drill down into this Dell box that is currently running Ubuntu, I can get a really good sense as to what's happening on this machine. So once this loads here in a second, Omar mentioned how much more asset data we now grab. And this is a big deal. We get the make and model, the manufacturer, we get the model, the manufacturer, the serial number, and that leads us to now being able to discover the warranty expiry date of any Linux box that you can install our agent on. That's a big plus. It also means that if you're looking to perform activities against a certain model of computer, maybe you're looking for all your Dell Optiplexes because you want to go ahead and update their firmware or their BIOS version or something to that effect. Well, previously you couldn't find those devices if they were running Linux because we didn't detect that information for you. So now that you get this data, you're going to have a much richer idea about what's in your environment, and you'll be able to take actions against those particular machines if that's the scenario that you're looking at. The other nice thing, just to quickly talk about it, is that remote control piece, I think, is something that you guys will really appreciate. Previously, you could use the Windows probe to SSH into any Linux box. And that's fine, but if you have a customer's environment who is mostly Linux or all Linux, or just doesn't have a spot where you can install the probe, well, you couldn't remotely control those Linux machines when you had to go ahead and solve a problem. So now that the remote control sessions are agent-based and don't require a probe at all, you can properly manage those environments. You've got what is effectively feature parity between the Linux agents and the Mac agents. They've got the same rough capabilities now, which is a big step forward. So those are the two quick things that I wanted to show you. Omar did a great job earlier of talking about patch delays in automatic approval rules. I don't think there's much to necessarily show you guys there. I think what we'll do now is switch back to that PowerPoint slide deck for a second. We've got our contact information up there. Let's start answering some questions. All right, so we have a ton of questions here. We'll just go down the list and start answering them. So Brett Bell asked a question when we were talking about automating delays for patch approvals. He said, is the delay from when the device detects that the patch is approved or from when the patch is released? The answer is a little bit in between, actually. The answer is that the device detects that the patch is available. It submits it back to N-central. And it is at that point when N-central evaluates that patch data and figures out that it belongs in an automatic approval rule, that's when the delay comes into play. So it's at that starting point. Sean Dion asked, when you have a delayed patch like that, how does it show up in the reports? The answer is it shows up as it does right now, which is not approved, because it's not actually getting approved until that particular date in the future. Adam Gow jokingly pointed out that, hey, that check engine light analogy that Omar made was just a joke in a way. Check engine light always means that the car has detected you have too much money. So that's a good one. Yeah. But then more seriously, he asked a question around the Ubuntu agent. He said, is the Ubuntu agent in the app repository, or do we have to add a new repository? The answer is it's not part of the, like you don't do like an apt-get, for example. It's not part of that. It is something that you can download right from the N-central UI, or you can push out from a discovery job. So it's totally separate from any sort of repository management that you're currently doing with your Ubuntu devices. A lot of the feedback we got was that not a lot of MSPs who are managing Ubuntu devices are necessarily deeply involved in managing like an apt-get repository or a software repository for them. Another good question from Adam was around, can you install the Ubuntu agent on non-GUI Linux servers? The answer is absolutely yes. The agent comes bundled with a shell script that you can run to either uninstall or reinstall or do a fresh install of the Linux agent. So for sure, it does not need to have a GUI in order to be installed. Another good question was around Office 2016 license keys. So we added the ability to discover Office 2016 license keys. We previously had added support for Office 2013, which was the question that was asked here, back in Central 10.2 Service Pack 1. So that's been a feature in the product for a little while. You should see those now in your license key inventory report or on the Applications tab of the device in Central. Another good question, Preston asked this, will we have the ability to run automation policies or shell scripts on Ubuntu agents? The short answer is not yet. The slightly longer answer is I'm waiting to see as the product manager for Incentral what the uptake on Ubuntu is, or on Linux devices in general. I feel like what we've done here is bring Linux monitoring in general on the Incentral platform to the right spot where it should get really good adoption. It's got the right feature set now. Let's have that conversation in a couple of months. If the adoption rate looks really good, absolutely, this is the next step to make, for sure.
So yeah, I'll answer the next couple of questions here. So we have a couple of questions regarding patching. So, what would be the best way to allow a selective Windows 10 version upgrade? So in today's webinar, we talked about the delayed automatic approval. So that's if you really want a hands-off approach. You don't want to look at the patch. You just want to say, hey, everything from Microsoft that's for Windows 10, go. Approved, have fun. If you want more control, then we do have the two other methods to approve patch. You have the approved by device and approved by patch. The approved by patch, you take a patch like the Windows 10 upgrade, and then you target it against a rule, right? Which is, also a filter per se. But your thought process here, Christian, regarding creating a custom device property, you could definitely do that if you do want to put that device under a bucket of devices where they only get a selected Windows 10 upgrade. So yeah, your thought process is fine. The next question here, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but has the issue with permissions over filters been corrected in the latest bug fixes? As far as my understanding, the only filters you cannot previously edit would be any ones that were created at the system level. We do allow you to clone them and change them any way you want, but as far as I'm aware, that was not a bug.
Yeah, we had a couple of permissions-related bug fixes in version 11.1. Drew, I believe the issue you're mentioning has been resolved. It may make sense to just send me a quick email, and we can follow up on that in more detail. Yeah, so Ben Landvatter asked, any chance we'll see future support for MSP Connect viewer in Linux? The answer there is yes. That is something that we are actively looking at. In terms of when it might get released, we're not quite at that stage yet. We're just in the beginning stages of looking into that, but absolutely, especially given that we're putting this sort of push on Linux as a step forward in the Incentral platform. Updating MSP Connect to support connecting to Linux clients that have GUIs makes a ton of sense. Another good question here, and sorry, there's actually a couple of duplicates. Any improvement to the misconfigured warnings, i.e. under patch management, Active Directory, SQL? Not at this point, no. It would kind of depend on what the situation is that's causing those to go misconfigured. In some cases, it's up to you as the MSP to properly configure them. In some cases, it may be software issues in your environment. That's a pretty broad question. So there's nothing specific there that has been done to improve those services.
Also, one of the questions here is, if the status is red, so failed, will the hover over show both the red and the yellow issues together? So currently the hover overs will just show the failures. Okay. Another really good question. This came up actually on this
earlier, Omar and I were doing this same webinar to some of our customers in Europe, and one of the questions they asked, it's been asked here as well, was there any plans for a Unix or a Linux probe, basically? So Kyle asked that question. Thanks for asking. It's a really great one. The answer there is no. At this point, creating a Linux probe would be a pretty expensive thing to do from an engineering point of view. It's not a trivial task, and the number of times we get asked for that just doesn't make for a good ROI. At this point, anyway, doesn't make a lot of sense. What I mentioned earlier, though, about we're looking at 11.1 as a proving ground for Linux usage in the MSP space. This is a conversation that I think in a couple of months, when we have better idea of market penetration and uptake on our Linux monitoring, it may make more sense to revisit the idea of a Linux probe at that point.
Yeah, so the next question here is there any ability to remote connect to an N-Central system from a Mac OS device? So yes, that does exist today. It was added in when we integrated MSP Connect or MSP Anywhere into N-Central. So for sure, you can remote from a Mac to a Mac device, or Mac to Windows, or Windows to Mac, or Windows to Windows. It's pretty, OS, open at that point. So for sure, you can remote connect from a Mac OS device. Next question here. So as for the Ubuntu agent, how does the remote control work? So it's purely SSH, and this was actually answered earlier. So we are going to start looking at adding potentially the MSP Connect into Linux as well.
All right, next question. Victor asks a really good question around Windows 10 and patching. So you're asking about, if you're patching Windows 10 during the day, that was something you used to do, but it was running into issues with closing out Windows and installing in the foreground. It looks like you're asking around best practice for, hey, should you be doing, installs of or upgrades of the operating system after hours, or can those be separated out into a different process? Yes, so you could. If you're looking at doing a Windows upgrade as opposed to just a patch, I think the best practice for sure would be around doing it after hours, or whenever your customer is not actively using their machine. Obviously, you don't want to disturb their work.
So the next question here. So what if you delayed your automatic patch approvals for 35 days, and then within those 35 days, a new patch superseded the old patch? Well, I'm assuming what will happen? All right, so my assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, is that since the new patch that came out within that 35-day period is also going to get that 35-day delay period, the first one that was approved 35 days ago would get installed 35 days from now. The new one would get installed. All right, so it's just a delay period. It's not like we say, oh, the new one was superseded, we're going to get rid of the old approval. That's not the way it works. It's just, again, following that timeline.
Yep. One question, I'm going to go backward a little bit in time in terms of the questions that were asked. Jeff Gillivan, you asked a really good question around, hey, if you delay the patch install, will the patch status service still report that it's missing or not? That's a really good question. The short answer is there's no change in behavior on that front between 11.0 and 11.1. But one of the things we're working on effectively next, after 11.1 gets released, is around making the patch status service aware of the maintenance windows for detection and install and reboot that you've already got set up, so that it doesn't go failed kind of prematurely. That way, if you've approved a patch, it won't consider that patch or evaluate that patch for success or failure until after an install window or a reboot window has occurred.
And a question we're also getting asked, Chris, is how does that transfer into the reports?
It's the same as if you'd manually approved the patch 30 days from now, for example. So until it's actually approved, it's going to show as not approved. It's only when it gets approved automatically that 30 days from now that you'd see the change.
Next question. So can private public key pair be used for Discovery Agent install credentials for Linux Agent?
Great question, Kevin. That's a good one. At this point, no. So at this point, we're just going off of plain credentials, like SSH credentials. I'm interested to see what people's feedback is on this, because if it's something that you're really looking for, is that instead of providing SSH credentials as a username and password, you provide SSH keys. That's certainly something we could look into. But in this case, the quickest path to sort of get this to market and to make people happy with the solution was to modify the existing discovery job logic we have for Mac devices, where you just enter in a username, password, and off you go. So absolutely, we will look for this going forward, see what kind of uptake it gets. Good request and good question.
Next question. So with the Ubuntu agent coming out soon, will the Red Hat Enterprise Linux agent be updated soon as well? So everything we pretty much mentioned in today's webinar is for both agents.
Yep.
So not only was the Ubuntu agent added in, but all that new features was also added into the Red Hat agent as well. So the remote control, the discovery, the asset discovery as well is there as well. So yes, for sure.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Can you exclude, so Tony asked a really good question, can you exclude preview patches from automatic approval? So you can set up your patch approvals to look for whatever category of patches you want. Previews should be one of those, I'd anticipate.
Can sudo be used to install the agent or only the user?
So it depends on how you have permissions set up on that box. That's a per machine sort of question. Generally speaking, if you want to go for the easiest approach, you should specify root just because that'll guarantee you that things work. But depending on how you have your file system permissions set up or what kind of user you're using, it'll vary from machine to machine and environment to environment. Oh, another good question. I'll talk about this. Christian, I'm glad you brought this up. Christian Kelly asked, has the problem with Windows agents going offline been fixed in this release? Good one. That's an excellent question. The short answer is yes. So we put a large focus on figuring out why it is that we had some problems where Windows agents were going offline. They were losing their configuration data, how to talk to the Incentral server. And it was a fairly large headache. If you were having the problem, your agents would stop checking in. Obviously, that's not a good thing. That's a core part of your monitoring capabilities. We've added a lot of redundancy and additional logic in the Incentral 11.1 agent to avoid those kind of situations in the future. If you happen to have offline agents now, get up to version 11.1 when it comes out. We'll talk about that release date in just a minute. Get up to version 11.1, get your agents upgraded to 11.1 as soon as you can. You shouldn't see that problem happen anymore. They should be rock solid at this point. And speaking of the release date, let's go ahead and answer that now. I know several of you have been asking. The plan at the moment is we're going to go live with 11.1 this coming Tuesday. So a week from today, which is September 5th, that's the release date. So anybody who is an on-premise Incentral user, or maybe not on-premise in the sense of in your building, but you've got your own Incentral instance running maybe in Azure or an Amazon or in your own data center, you'll have access to this on September 5th. For those of you that are running with an Incentral on-demand account, like a hosted offering from us, your Incentral server will likely be upgraded about a month after that. So somewhere in the middle of October, you can expect to start to see upgrade notices come out.
Now, a couple questions have been rolling in regarding scripting or bash scripting on Linux devices as well. So currently, the way that this is supported is we use Automation Manager, and we actually execute a PowerShell script or an automation policy on a Windows device to send SSH commands to a Linux device on the network. Right. So a couple questions have been coming in regarding, can I run, a bash script? Can I run an app/get update command? You can do it. It just requires you to use Automation Manager for it, which would be it's an SSH object. So you'd connect that to a device over SSH, run a command, and then close the connection.
All right, another good one was around, and this is a question we get a lot too. Eli was asking, is there a roadmap of planned updates or changes in future versions of Incentral? I can tell you, I have conversations every week with partners about what is our roadmap, what are our plans. It's something we talk about when we do our summits or our local events in various cities across the world. Posting the roadmap, though, is something that we've never done as a company. Interesting. And we don't do it for several reasons, but the good news there is that the executive team, sort of our VPs, our general managers, our CEO, they've been discussing that just recently around kind of releasing those restrictions of being able to publish a roadmap publicly speaking. So that is something that we're actually talking about doing maybe in the short-term future. Michael Schmidt asked a question of, hey, will we see a better connection rate of Mac devices? I'm assuming, Michael, perhaps you're talking about remote control connections. That's something that we can, if you're having trouble with Mac devices, we can handle that outside of a code update to N-central. MSP Connect, for example, is something that we can update outside of any N-central release. If there's a problem with that tool, we can take care of it as quickly as possible. So if you haven't already, please do log a case. We can, of course, take a look at that. Another good question from Brian Perona. Is the Red Hat agent able to read SNMP data from itself for monitoring? My understanding is currently this is only possible via a probe. That is still the case. So we did not in this release add new monitoring capabilities to our Linux agents, either Red Hat or Ubuntu. That is something where if we need to get into that, certainly we'll take a look at that as we go forward. Adam asked another great question. Can we do patches on Ubuntu? Not yet. That's something where if we add in the ability to do scheduled tasks like SSH onto the box and run a shell script, that's something you could do that way. As I mentioned earlier, depending on the uptake of Linux devices now, once 11.1 goes live, that'll help me make the business case for what the next steps on the Linux front may be. Does it need to be patched? Does it need to be, MSP Connect-based remote control? Does it need to be backup? Does it need to be antivirus? That'll help answer those questions. But the gist of it is, hey, I'm interested in understanding where we can go next with Linux devices. Another good question. If a computer is running but the agent status has failed, you can't MSP Connect. Has this been changed? That's from Mark Trinidad. Mark, you should absolutely be able to do that now. Just because the agent isn't running, MSP Connect is a separate application, and as long as it's checking in, you should be able to use it without needing the agents to be online. Absolutely. If you happen to be running an older version of N-central, maybe you're running 10.2 or even 10.1, that wasn't the case, but the last several versions of N-central have all had it so that MSP Connect will let you connect even if the agent is offline.
So next question here is, when can we expect to see the agent and the desktop icon integrated into one install? So first off, let me just explain the desktop icon. Not many of you might know, but we actually have something called Connect to Help. It's a system tray application that's available on our community page, the NRC, where you download it and you configure a tray icon that's present on your machine. It's like a phone home for support, and you can add in branding and stuff like that as well. So the question is, can that tray icon be, is there any plans to roll it into the existing agent? As far as my understanding, there's nothing on the roadmap for it yet, and there's a reason for it. We don't want anybody to install an agent and they all of a sudden see a tray icon, and then one of their customers starts to, call them up and say, hey, there's a new tray icon on my computer. What's the deal? It's not saying that you can't automate it yourself, though. Right? We actually even hold a course for this as part of our subscription training, where they show you how to build the Connect to Help tray icon, and then they show you how to build it's called a scheduled task profile, to automatically deploy it once the agent gets installed. All right, so definitely have a look at that. It's a free course. You can attend it. It's on the NRC under subscription training.
Okay, I think in terms of the questions around really what's new in version 11.1, I think we've answered most of those actually. There are some other questions that people are asking that are maybe unrelated to version 11.1, and I don't want to necessarily, answer a whole bunch of questions that are unrelated to what people have come here for. At this point, I think if you've got additional questions, you know what, you've got my email address, you've got Omar's email address. I'd be happy to have kind of one-off conversations with you guys. But I think at this point, I'll let the rest of the group go. Give yourself an additional 15 minutes of free time. Enjoy your day. This has been a really good webinar. You guys asked a ton of really good questions, so thank you. We're very excited to get version 11.1 out into the field, and we think you guys will be too. It's a really great release, much more stable, lots of new features, and it continues the trend of making N-central the best RMM platform available in the market.
Absolutely. And one final comment, guys, is that there is going to be a survey sent out at the end. There might be a question regarding web protection on that survey. If it's there, just ignore it. It's not part of this webinar. Thank you again, everyone, for attending, and have a great day.